The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
Here's what's cooking on an all-new Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball show. We're ranking outfielders today, and we got a special guest, Bob Long, joining us as well. That's what's cooking on today's Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball show.
Play ball!
Welcome in to an all-new edition of the Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball show presented by BellyUpFantasySports.com and Righteous Felon Jerky. Welcome in, folks. I'm your host, Vince Stover. I'll be joined in a little bit by Kevin Wilson. And we also have another guest coming on here in just a few minutes as well. We'll introduce to you. I am located in Kentucky, and we've had power outages this week due to storms. And so I'm in a friend's basement right now, not in my normal settings. So hopefully everything works audio-wise, Wi-Fi-wise, all that kind of stuff. And we give you a great show today, and we are looking forward to the show that is ahead as well. We want to say hello to our live viewers watching on the Sports Stove YouTube page and all those watching in on the Belly Up Fantasy Facebook page, and also welcome in to all those listening later on to the podcast version on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast to listen to. So we sure do appreciate you joining us in. If you've missed any of the past episodes, make sure you go to the Sports Stove YouTube page or the Sports Stove podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and you can listen to all the past episodes where we've ranked middle infielders, corner infielders, as well as catchers already so far this season. And again, today we're going to be looking at outfielders. We'll talk a little bit about designated hitters as well, and looking forward to that. But first, let's get into our first segment of the day called our Fantasy Burner. The Fantasy Burner is a topics where we look at just a quick fantasy topic each week. And this week, I want to talk about strategy and specifically kind of talk about your draft strategies. There's a lot of different ways you can go about your fantasy baseball drafts, whether you're a homer. You know, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we gave our homer picks. And there are times where you got guys from your team, the team you cheer for, that you just feel like, man, I got to have these guys on my team. When I first started playing fantasy baseball many, many moons ago, I came across this philosophy just as a way to follow baseball. I wasn't diving deep into baseball at that time. I had the team I cheered for, and I wanted a better way, an easier way to follow them. And having them on my fantasy team made the most sense, because then I could play fantasy sports as well as keep up with my favorite players and favorite team. And so that's something that I did for a while. Then I grew more competitively. And so then you come into different draft strategies. When you have a draft strategy, you have to find out what your league is. You have to know the rules of your league. You cannot have a draft strategy if you do not know how your league is scored. And every league can be a little bit different. We play on the ESPN pages. I've got a league that I've been managing for many years with friends and family in it. And then we do our Belly Up Fantasy League as well, which is a head-to-head points league. The other league I do is a head-to-head categories league. And I really need to branch out. I need to try some other things, but I've just been doing this for so long. I did a Yahoo League, points league, a couple of years ago, and it was fine and everything. I love our Belly Up Fantasy League. And again, the competition with guys that we're working with at Belly Up and other things as well. And when you get into these points leagues, for instance, because when we're doing our rankings with Kevin, and Kevin will be on later in the program, we do a head-to-head points league. So we have to study it out. And honestly, in our league, pitchers score as much as anybody. And so I expect there will be at least a couple of us that go pitcher heavy in our draft in 2 weeks, which we're going to do live right here on the Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball show. And if you go pitcher heavy, though, you have to look out for a couple things. Number one, if a pitcher gets injured and misses multiple starts, that's going to hurt you, I think, more than if a batter gets injured and misses some things as well. And so, sorry, trying to find the right lighting to help out with this wonderful setup, and I appreciate friends helping me out with this. If you go pitcher heavy, you got to understand the injury risk. So if you're going to go Jacob deGrom, for instance, you might want to kind of, I don't know. To me, that's a dangerous strategy. If you're going to go Jacob deGrom, especially early, and you gotta hope that he stays at all healthy, that's a scary way to go. But again, in our league, that's going to score you a lot of points if they're healthy, if they're getting starts. We also have points for holds, so you can get the setup guy off the bullpen. We get points for saves, of course, as well. So pitching is vital in the league, the belly up league that we do. And my other league that I'm in, it's a little bit more even. You can get a couple different strategies. So I tend to go more heavy with hitters. It's a keeper league, so I'm able to keep pitchers and kind of stock up on hitters through the draft and kind of play it that way as well. So when you're looking at fantasy baseball draft strategies, first of all, you got to know your league. You got to know how it's scored. You also need to know the other people in your league. Recently, in the Belly Up Fantasy Baseball League, we got some new people that are going to be a part of it. We'll introduce those to you as we get into the draft in 2 weeks. But in that league, I find out who do these guys cheer for, because you got to know if there's going to be homers in your league. You know that a guy from their team might go around earlier. So if you really want them, you might have to reach for them. Now, a smart fantasy baseball player isn't going to reach for anybody. They're going to wait and take the value that's there for them in whatever round it is that they are sitting in. So when you're coming up with your strategy, you've got to know who's in your league. You have to understand, hey, this guy, he loves the Yankees, so he's going to take all these Yankees in a round or so early. Or if you're in the back end on the draft this year, I'm going to be sitting at number 9 or number 10. So I'll have back-to-back picks, and I won't pick again for 20 picks. So it's understanding, okay, who's going to be there when I come back around? Is it worth reaching for this guy now? Because I know he's not going to be there at the end as well. So you have to think through all these things, and maybe you've already done your draft and now you're trying to pick off the pile a little bit, which is a great thing you got to do. And we'll talk about that in future episodes as well. But we're getting ready for draft. For me, it's draft season right now. We're in that process of drafting at these leagues. And so in doing so, we're planning out, okay, how does this league score? What do I need to focus on? What are the other guys doing? I personally go into drafts with not as much of a plan as maybe you would think. I like to see what everybody else is going to do. If they're going to go pitcher heavy, I'll go the other direction, and I'll get my pitchers later in the draft. If they're going batter heavy, well, then I'll take my pitchers early and wait. I'm very much a wait and see. My dad, he likes to plan out, okay, in the first round, I need this position. In the second round, I need this position. By the fifth round, I need at least 3 of these positions, whatever it may be. For me, I like to keep it more fluid. But that's the way it is. And then you got Kevin, who we'll talk to later in the show. And Kevin, personally, I think he's going to go pitcher heavy. We'll see in a couple weeks. But Kevin's also the kind of guy, he's got no ties. He doesn't care about homers. He's not going to take someone from the Dodgers because he likes the Dodgers. He's going to take the best value that's available to him at the time. He's going to reach for a couple guys that he likes, but not from the Dodgers. He's going to reach from guys that he likes, like MJ Melendez, for instance. I guarantee you Kevin ends up with MJ Melendez because he is all in on him. And he's probably going to take him around earlier than anybody else was going to take him. He did the same thing with Yadier Molina for years, and he'll do the same thing with Melendez this year. So you've heard it here. When we do the draft, I'm not sure if Kevin's going to see this part of the show or not. We'll bring this back up and say, I told you so. But that's your fantasy burner for this week. We got to make sure that you are ready for the draft, as draft season is upon us. It's time now to shift to our second segment of the show. It's our guest segment, the Call to the Pin. Our next segment is the Call to the Pin. It is presented by Righteous Felon Jerky. If you want the purest jerky in the game, you got to go straight to the source. Righteous Felon has partnered with the best natural black Angus beef producers in the land to lock up supply and guarantee the best tasting, the best texture, and the freshest beef jerky on the market. Righteous Felon offers free shipping on all orders, $50 or more. You can visit righteousfelon.com, use the promo code BELLYUP, and you're going to get 15% off your purchase. Bringing in now our first guest of the program. Joins us for the first time on this show. He is the founder of the Fantasy Football Expo and the annual Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. He's Bob Long. Bob, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. And also now we'll talk about this. I guess I can get that on the Fantasy Baseball Consistency Guide, which we will definitely talk about as well. But yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for being on. I told the listeners at the beginning of the show, we got power outages in my area, so I'm in a friend's basement tonight. So hopefully you can hear me okay. And
yeah, I'm good.
Okay, very good. Oh, Bob, I appreciate you coming on, and I do want to talk about that consistency guide because consistency is an area it's hard for the average person to go out and track. And so you're part of this consistency guide that you've done in football and now doing in baseball as well. What is the key, I guess, to tracking this consistency, and how is that helping fantasy baseball players?
Well, it's no different than fantasy football. And I mean, obviously there's people out there that just do baseball, and that's fine, but a lot of us do both. And the old days, we seem to be more rotisserie accumulative, but I'm seeing, and what caused us to really go out and create this baseball consistency guide was two reasons. Number one, we actually have a tool on Big Guy Fantasy Sports website that you can go in and put in your scoring method in your head-to-head points league, and it literally will calculate the consistency for the players in your league by position. And it uses the same formula as we do for football. It gets a quality factor for that position by week. And then basically every time a player goes over that quality factor or that number for the week. And for example, I'm looking at it now on the website, first baseman, clutch factor for typical scoring, nothing fancy. Your typical head-to-head points league is 16.38. So Pete Alonso is number one in fantasy points, but he's 76%, which actually ranks him, once this redoes here, in third place. So he's right there, or he's actually tied for second. Christian Walker, who played a little bit less, was 80% consistent and ranked seventh in total points at that position. So that's what we're there trying to show, is that everybody looks at points. It's always a factor in football for years. Everybody's like, all right, this guy scored the most points for the season, so he must be one of the better players. And he might be, but he also might be inconsistent in getting there. And that's what we're trying to show folks, is that, especially in baseball, where you got 26 weeks to go by, or 25 weeks, you want a player that not only scores points, a lot of points, but also on a consistent basis. Because there's certainly guys out there, I'm scrolling down through first baseman, and we got folks like Reese Hoskins, who 10th in total points, but only 56% consistent, which means barely over half the time is he really helping your team at first base on a week-to-week basis. That's what this is about. That's what the guide's about. That's what the website, the tools that we have there to show you that. And the cool thing we just added is a trend report, so you can see during the season how hot or not these players are. So you can actually look and see, oh, wow, this guy's put up 3 straight, consistent weeks in a row. Maybe it's time to get on the bandwagon with him. And it might be somebody you're not aware of. So that's what we're there. Both these tools are very helpful during the season. The guide is helpful to help you prep for the draft itself. But this is the only consistency tool out there that I'm aware of in fantasy baseball and head-to-head points leagues.
Yeah, it's funny. For so many years, we just kind of go off our gut, right? You have a guy that you had on your team, and you're like, I don't like that guy. He screwed me over. And then you look at the total points, you think, oh, he did okay. But just for some reason, you never liked him. You never felt like he was there for you, even though his total points were good. Right. And now this is putting, I think, stats to your gut that says this is why you don't like him. This is the issue here, right? Yeah. Because waiver wires, especially, we're in draft season right now, but within a couple of weeks, we're going to be in waiver wire season where we're trying to find those guys as people get injured, as people just completely fall off the face of the earth, whatever it may be. Right. We got to find something to give us the advantage over, because right now everybody's kind of using the same tools, it seems like. Right. And so you got to find that one thing that's going to put you over the top in your league.
Yeah, no, and this is exactly what it's about. I mean, this is what I created in football years ago. The Fantasy Football Consistency Guide's been out for 7 years, and it was nominated 6 straight years in a row over the last 6 years by Fantasy Sports Writers of America as one of the top publications in the country. And it's because it's that tool that people can't find anywhere else. You want the edge, you need an edge, because everybody's got the same data. Guess what? Not everybody's got this book. It's hard to see on here, isn't it? Yeah. But, the dang thing. But yeah, go to Amazon. Just type in Fantasy Baseball Consistency, and it's going to pop up. It's only $7.99. You can get it in 2 or 3 days if you're a Prime, subscriber. And boom, you're ready for this next coming weekend for your drafts or whenever they are. We're updating it if there's anything going on, injuries or concerns. I'm going to be flat out honest. I am not the baseball consistency expert. I know how to play. I've done it, but it's Ron Rigney at our website that does all of the top stuff. He wrote the whole book. I just help put the stats together. But this has always just been something in the background that I felt like just needed to be out there. Football was definitely proving that. I mean, we're hoping someday to have this for head-to-head hockey leagues and head-to-head NBA leagues. And so, anytime there's a head-to-head scenario, consistency is what you want out of your players, in addition to them scoring a lot of points.
What got you into the fantasy football world? What was it that kind of drug you into, hey, I can make a career out of this?
The career thing took a long time. I started playing fantasy football in 1985.
Okay. I was one. I was 1 year old.
You're one, yes. Yeah, well, you're one of the rare ones. A lot of them go, I wasn't born yet. I'm like, yeah, I get it. But yeah, we started playing even before the internet, thought it was a fun game. The consistency concept came in 2002 when my team didn't make the playoffs. I was 500 and I was the second highest scoring team in the league. And I was just furious. Like, what the heck happened? And I'm a CPA by day. So obviously I'm a bean counter. So crunching numbers is my thing. So I started crunching the numbers and I found out that I had 3 or 4 very inconsistent players that, scored a lot of points, but didn't do it consistently. And they really hurt my team. And I said, oh, okay, well, so I just started creating things and got some help from people that did web design and database stuff. And, long story short, I started putting out my own articles, started creating my own online tools, and then started my own site about 8-10 years ago, started doing the book. It just became more and more obvious that people really wanted this information. I was putting an article in like the magazines you could buy on the shelves, but people wanted more of that. And most of the magazines that I were doing something for said, well, we don't have enough room to put any more of that data. Why don't you just do your own book? I'm like, oh, okay. So, I didn't realize Amazon allowed you to do that. And so I started doing it, put it out there. And like I said, now it's been very successful and very well respected. And I'm honored by that. But it's, just like we're doing now for baseball, it's so important to share this knowledge to help people get that edge that nobody else is doing. And back then, while there were some people doing consistency in fantasy football, it wasn't at the level we wanted to do it, which was super deep, really getting into the players, finding different ways to twist the data to know, hey, they're hot, they're not, do they have a great second half that might lead into a great 2023 season? And same way with baseball, we're doing the same stuff. We providing these tools and this data that people like, when brain dead. I was trying to think the guy that writes the Ron Chandler. I put out the, Fantastic stuff for years. I've known him for many years, and he was one to really help push me when I was kind of like, I don't think anybody cares about this stuff. And he said, well, when my book first came out, I didn't think anybody cared about all these analytics either. And now I've been writing a book for 32 years. I'm like, yep, you get it. And so, he was a big push, and he was a big friend and big supporter. And, Ron Chandler's always was there. And, but but I never thought about consistency fantasy baseball because head-to-head leagues weren't as cool then. It was always rotisserie. It was all about the cumulative, which didn't no good for consistency. Now, fantasy football players who do some fantasy baseball seem to be trending towards the head-to-head points leagues because it's very similar to fantasy football. You set a lineup once a week and you get your points and you win, whether it's by, doing it with the 5x5 or just a win is a win. It's still a head-to-head scenario, and that's what we're trying to help folks out with.
Yeah, for me, I got into baseball. I was into fantasy football since I was 11. My dad let me in one of his leagues, and we had that was back when it was all on paper, and we had one guy print off everything at the end of the week and give you your points and everything like that. I got into fantasy baseball just to follow my favorite players. It was the thing to do, I suppose. And I've been in categories leagues for a long time, and then just recently started getting into the points leagues and love it. Absolutely love it.
Well, it's funny, if I can interrupt you real quick. Yeah. I heard you talking before I came on, and you were talking about one of the things that I always laughed at back when I did play fantasy baseball back in the 90s, and it was the homers.
Yeah.
Now, I live in Northeast Ohio, and in the 90s, the Indians were awesome.
Yeah.
And so it was an auction league all the time. So I would just let these guys just horribly overbid. Like Albert Bell would be going for like $75 and Tomey would be going for $65. And I would just sit back and just wait for these guys to just spend all their money. And they'd be like, I'll take Ichiro Suzuki for $1. and I won 7 out of 10 years and then finally stopped.
Yeah.
Because I just, like you said, I knew they were all homers, and all I had to do was wait for them to clear out all the Indians, which are still good players. I'm not going to argue,
sure.
But after they bought 1 or 2 of them, they were completely broke and they couldn't do anything. So,
yeah, last year we had a guy in our league. He's not in the league this year, but first round he took, I don't remember who, one of the Indians pitchers or Guardians pitchers. And we were all like, what are you doing? This is pick number 5 in the draft. And so my dad, who loves playing fantasy sports, he texted me just a couple of days ago. He goes, I need to know who everybody's favorite team is in the league. so I'm working on getting that information for him. And, to me, if you're going to cheer for a team, it's nice to have a guy on your fantasy team that you like. Sure. But if you're actually in it to win it, you kind of have to put all that aside. Not kind of. You have to put all that aside and go out and find the right people. And your tools at Big Guy Fantasy Sports can obviously help with that. Are you an Indians or Guardians fan?
I am, and and even though I hate the name, and I've been to actually 2 fantasy camps as well, which is kind of you go to spring training fields out in Arizona, and you get to you get your own jersey, your name, and you get your own locker, and you're playing on the fields that all the pros play during spring training. I did that twice, and both with Indians on my thing. And I'm like, I don't know if I can even go back and get a Guardians jersey. I don't know if I can. It's just so disheartening. And I love my team, and I certainly would love to see them win the World Series. Yeah. But I said that's probably when I would maybe buy a Guardians thing, is when they win a World Series.
Sure.
Yeah, I root for him. I love Terry Francona. Just does an amazing job with that team. Low budget. Kind of the small market team, but yeah, they always do a great job with your pitchers and the players they get, and I think they'll be competitive, and that's the key. They've always usually pretty competitive, and but yeah, they've always been my team. I'm huge. Tomey was my guy. That's who I loved, in my younger days. But I grew up in the really bad Indians, era of Frank Duffy and Chris Chambliss and those kind of guys playing too. So
now Jose Ramirez, he's I would assume one of the most consistent players out there, right?
Absolutely. It did basically any position. I mean, at third base last year, he crushed it. Picking up the numbers now. Yeah. First in total points, 80% consistency. Believe it or not, Manny Machado, 83% consistency ahead of him, but about 35 points behind him in total. But yeah, he's definitely one of the top guys out there. And like I said, Machado's right up there with him.
See, last year I ranked Machado ahead of Ramirez, and I got blasted for it. And at the end of the day, Ramirez was the better player, but a little bit more consistent.
More points, but he was a little bit more consistent, only by 1 week. But yeah, they're pretty actually even when it comes right down to it.
Yeah. Do you think that the schedule change where they're playing everybody, they play less division games this year, do you think that'll affect guys who have been known as being consistent? Do you think those lack of division games will knock back the consistency at all? Or do you think it'll actually improve consistency?
Well, a lot of it's going to be who are those teams that you're playing that now that like I said, the Indian or the Guardians and AL Central, now they're going to play more teams, from different places. If those teams are all bad teams and bad pitchers, I guess it's going to help them, right? So I think, usually in most of these cases, when it comes to consistency, the cream rides to the top.
Yeah.
What you're looking for, obviously, with a lot of this data, just like in football, is you're looking for those the sleepers, if we can use that term still anymore. The guys that are undervalued, that are more consistent, maybe didn't score a ton of points, but they might be a great value because their consistency, helps them that people don't realize,
Sure.
Like a Nate Lowe last year was 72% consistent with actually ranked him 4th in third baseman, even though he's 11th in total points.
Mm-hmm.
What is his ADP right now? Is he a good value? He might be. Obviously depends on your league and where you're drafting, but that might be a good value pick because he has consistency, but didn't have that top 10 points. But he was, 11th but 4th in total consistency. Where he was ahead of Arenado, he was ahead of Bregman, he was ahead of Vlad, he was ahead of Riley. So, may surprise some people.
Definitely. Now tonight, me and Kevin are ranking outfielders. So who's at the top or near the top of the outfielder consistency that maybe we wouldn't think of as towards the top of the rankings?
Well, so obviously we all know Aaron Judge is way up there by a lot. 88% consistent, of course, way ahead in total points. What may surprise somebody is that Brandon Drury, who was 12th in total points in the outfield, was actually the number 2 most consistent outfielders at 75%. That's maybe surprising. Ohtani's right there at 4th, Julio Rodriguez at 3rd, Mookie Betts at 5th, Adolis Garcia, 68%, George Springer, Cedric Mullins, Schwarber. That's your top guys from a consistency standpoint in the outfield. I mean, Trout's only 64%, even though he was 8th in total points. Now, I know he was injured a lot last year, so that's probably a lot of his issues. But those are the kind of guys that are up there that may be of good value, may really provide some solid value from an outfielder's perspective.
He's Bob Lung from Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and he's got his partnered with as well, but his fantasy baseball consistency guide now available on Amazon.com. And you said $7.99? Is that what you said?
$7.99, yeah. And then when you get it, you can use a coupon in there, and it's only $10 for the whole season to have access to all of these, these consistency tools for baseball, the consistency trend report. All of that stuff will be available to you behind the paywall for only $10 for the whole season.
That's a great deal. Bob, if people want to follow you, where's the best place for them to follow you at?
They can follow me on Twitter at Bob_Lung. And also don't forget to follow at Ron Rigney, Rigney. He's your baseball guy. He can certainly help you with all the consistency data. I'll try. But like I said, baseball is not necessarily my forte, but I certainly know it well enough that I can help you out and explain the consistency, but he can explain the details and why he ranked his people the way he did.
We'll have to get him on the show later this season as well. But Bob, we appreciate your time today. Thank you for taking some time for us. Absolutely enjoyed it. And again, everybody can go to Amazon.com and you can find the fantasy baseball consistency guide there, $7.99. And then you get the coupon inside to get $10 for the year at BigGuyFantasySports.com for all those tools that'll definitely help set you apart. Bob, again, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Yes, sir.
Let me be a part of it.
Yes, sir. All right, that's Bob Long. All right, it is now time to get to our rankings, and let's get into the Fantasy Focus. And now back with us is the man, the myth, the legend, the senior fantasy writer at bellyupfantasysports.com, Kevin Wilson. Kevin, welcome to the show, man. Been a long time no see.
Yeah, it's too long in between these shows, Vince. So, we put so much stuff in on each show, and it's packed to the seam. So.
It is indeed. Now, I've told the other people we have power outages. So I'm not at home. I'm at a friend's basement tonight. So we've been without power since Friday night. And hopefully.
No. We had that same storm pass through here Thursday. And we had high winds, but no power outages here.
Yeah. So
there's been other places, but not for us.
Where I live, there's not a lot of houses, so I think we're kind of far down on the totem pole. They're working on getting everybody else up and going. So hopefully tomorrow they'll get to us. We'll see how that goes. But enough about me. Let's get to fantasy baseball. And anybody who's just tuning in, if you missed any of the interview with Bob or any of the earlier parts of the show, make sure you go back. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. Or here on YouTube.
I caught the tail end of what he was saying, so I'm going to make sure I go and check what he had to talk about. So
I'll tell you what, it's an incredible tool, and it brings a new something that can set you apart in your leagues. When you start looking at these consistencies and how you said, Drury was second in outfielders with consistency.
That blew me away when I heard that. I would never have come up with that on my own.
Yeah, and of course that doesn't mean you draft Drury second as an outfielder, but you see the value in him as you get later into the rounds and things like that. This segment is presented by bellyupfantasysports.com for all your fantasy needs, both football, baseball, hockey, basketball, and everything else in between. Go visit bellyupfantasysports.com, and we greatly appreciate the support of the Belly Up Fantasy crew as well here on this program. Kevin, we're 2 weeks away from our draft in this league. 2
weeks, it's hard to believe. It's rolling in, and the
you like
is just like 3 or 4 weeks away? So
right,
it's coming.
Are you all in right now? Like, what are you thinking about right now throughout the week when you look at fantasy baseball? Is it draft strategy? Is it rankings? Is it the season?
Well, my draft strategy kind of ebbs and flows a little bit now, especially that I know what my draft position is, which is number 7. And so that could go a whole bunch of different ways. And I just have to figure out what do I value in that position, because last year I had the first overall pick. There was no evaluation necessary. So I've been doing some mock drafts with me at the number 7 position, and it seems like the same player keeps falling to me in that position, and it's one of them that we're going to talk about tonight.
Oh, okay. I like it. Now, don't go back and watch the beginning of the show. I told everybody a player you're going to pick at some point in the draft, but don't go back and listen. I'll tell you on draft night if I was right or wrong. You can't listen because then you'll ruin it. So, but I talked about your love for in the past for Yadier Molina, and so last year finally he didn't come through for you, right?
Yeah. So no, he did not. But that was fine because I had MJ Melendez. I added from the waiver wire, and he did just fine.
He came through for you,
and so we've already talked about him. He's one of my favorite catchers in fantasy. And so we'll have to see how that works out on draft day.
Yeah, I was looking at the guys in our league. We'll get to the outfielders in just a second, people. Just hold on. But I was looking at our league the other day and we got 3 Phillies fans in our league. For the first time in my life, there's another Brewers fan in my league.
Of course, I knew that, he lives in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And I know that because I'm on the show with him, all the time.
Fantasy football show, yeah.
Fantasy football, except for this morning, obviously, because I was at work. But and I knew that he's got his Green Bay shirt. He's got that going on every show, so I know he's a proud Packers guy. But he's never mentioned the Brewers to me.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that, I was like, all right, we're gonna have to keep the eyes on you two guys. And I'm aware of the 2 Phillies guys. Who's the third one?
Nathan Ewan is also a Phillies guy. He also likes the A's, but he's a Phillies /A's guy.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about too many him getting too out of
He
whack
can,
with the Oakland A's.
he can have them all.
He can have them all. He can draft them all. So, if you do that, Nathan, just know you will
They're
get
all
teased.
they're all yours. All right, let's get to our fantasy outfield rankings. I do not have the slide for us today with the power outage and everything. I just never got to it. So we'll talk about our fantasy outfielders. Let's start with the top 3 in our rankings. Kevin, why don't you go first? Your top 3 outfielders.
My top 3 outfielders are Juan Soto of the Padres, and then Aaron Judge of course, the Yankees. And then I have Ronald Acuna of the Atlanta Braves in my number 3 slot.
So let's talk. Well, we both have Soto number 1. I feel like this is going to be a huge year for him, and a slight dip for Aaron Judge. I don't think Aaron Judge
could possibly replicate what he did a year ago, because it was one of the great offensive seasons that anyone's ever seen in 100 years.
Yeah.
So we're not going to see that again. But even just if he comes even close to that, he's fantasy gold. And I mentioned that I'm number 7 in the draft, and Aaron Judge is a player that has fallen to me just about every draft I've done.
Really?
And so Aaron Judge has become on Team Wilson on all the mock drafts that I have done. And you mentioned Juan Soto, and I think it's interesting about Juan Soto because ESPN has him as a number 2 overall player, which I agree with. But some of these others, like Fantasy Pros and things like that, have him like, okay, so I have it here. Juan Soto, he is the 5th outfielder on Fantasy Pros. That is insanity.
What?
To me. Insanity. And then this number 7 overall player. Now, if perchance, and I don't see it happening, but if I'm on the board at number 7 and Juan Soto is sitting there, he is coming on Team Wilson. All right. Just know that right off the bat, because we all know the troubles he had when he went to the Padres, and before that he was on one of the worst teams maybe ever.
Right.
But he walked, 1,000 times, and his on-base percentage was through the roof, and we could put, I think, aside all those problems he had with the Padres and getting traded and all that stuff with the contract, and 14 years or whatever it was for $498 million, and stuff like that. Mess with his mind. It was pretty obvious there, but I think he'll settle in. He's got a great lineup around him. We've talked about that before. And so Juan Soto, to me, is clearly the number 1 outfielder.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, I have a different guy, though, in my top 3. I've got Acuna as number 4. I got Mookie Betts up there, and I think that we're going to see a lot more steals out of him. I know you've got him just a few more drops down.
I've got him at number 6.
Yeah.
And so, as a Dodger guy, you put him at number 6. I thought that was pretty fair, even though I wanted to move him up. But these guys, all these guys, are just outstanding players.
It's a deep position.
The number 4 is Julio Rodriguez is number 4 on my list, and he's the guy. Even though he did everything he possibly could, he's American League Rookie of the Year, and Fantasy Pros actually has a number 3 at outfield, so I thought that was pretty fair. Me putting them at number 4, and Kyle Tucker. I know you talked about you're not with the Houston Astros hitters too much this year, but I had him on my team a year ago, and he did everything you could possibly ask for. And he was one of those guys who was a value. Where I picked him, he exploded his draft day value. What's not going to happen this year? Because he's going to come off the board at the latest in the 2nd round.
Yeah, so Kyle Tucker's a guy that I refuse to draft. I have him in my top 10 because I think his points and things like that, it makes sense for him to be there. But he's a guy that I refuse to draft. I always think that Kyle Tucker is going to bust. And I'll stay on that train till it becomes true. But
all right,
so I've got him at number 8 on my list.
To me, is that he's first of all he's a left-handed hitter.
Yeah.
And all that stuff that's going on, all the left-handed hitters in the world are going to benefit from what's the new rules and all that. And he was batting 6th last year. I think he moves up in that in Houston lineup, and that's got to help him. So he's done 30 homers, 100 RBIs. He's a solid outfielder that I would happily, if he passed on him, I'll happily take him.
To me, he is the fantasy version of the real life Tampa Bay Rays. You look at the Rays and you go, there's no way they're going to be any good this year. And then they're there. They're always there at the end. Yeah.
That's why I put out somebody was saying that the Rays are not going to get in the playoffs. I'm like, well, planning on that is not a winning strategy because the Rays are always there every single year. There. Even though their payroll is like 28th in baseball or even last
way down there.
No, Oakland's last.
Last, yeah.
Yeah. But they use all their assets correctly. And so I don't know how we got on Tampa, but but
you've
Kyle
got
Tucker at number 5 to me is a solid play.
So my number 5 is Mike Trout. And to me, the one thing with Mike Trout you always have to look at is the injury issue.
Yep.
When he's playing now,
year,
he went through
he still hit 40 home runs.
Yeah. And he went through a 2-week slump. I mean, I don't think he had a hit in 2 weeks.
I remember that you had him. He was like 0 for 25 or something ridiculous like that. And then the second half came and you couldn't get him out.
Yeah. He did his job finally.
Yeah. And because I've got him at number 7.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty good behind Mookie. And then got Mike Trout, number 8's Michael Harris of the Braves. So the Braves have 2 of the top 8 outfielders in baseball to me. And then a surprise maybe is Cedric Mullins at number 9 out of Baltimore. And then
I've got Mullins up at number 7 on my list.
So we're pretty much on the same page when it comes to Cedric Mullins. Yeah. I've had him in the past, and he's got speed. He could do everything. Baltimore's lineup's getting better all the time.
Yes.
And so Fantasy Pros has him at number 12. That's way too low for me. And 156 games he played. He's in the lineup. He's got speed. So Cedric Mullins is a solid player that you could get, and they've got him 43rd overall.
Ooh.
So we're talking.
That's 4th round.
To this, 43rd ranked player in baseball. Not according to Kevin, but according to Fantasy Pros. So.
That's interesting.
He'll be available in the 4th round or 5th.
Yeah, outfield is probably the deepest. Obviously, you got to have more outfielders on your team than anything else, and other than pitchers. But it's a very, very deep position. And I look at these guys.
I feel comfortable waiting around on some of these players that you can first base and third and second base are not deep as we talked about before, but. Outfielders, you can wait around for an outfielder.
For me, I got 7 guys towards the top. So, I mean, Soto, Betts, Judge, Acuna are my top tier. Trout is just below them because of injury. Then I've got Julio Rodriguez and Cedric Mullins. To me, I'd be happy with either of those guys on my team as my number 1 outfielder, even. And because I think there's value late in the draft.
Right, but I think that Julio is going to come off the board earlier. Then we will be able to get him.
I agree with that. Then I've got Kyle Tucker at 8. Like I said, I'm not drafting him, but I think he belongs there. We both have Kyle Schwarber on our list at 10. And Schwarber's one of those guys. I should have asked Bob about his consistency grade because Schwarber's one of those guys that I look at and go, man, I really don't want Schwarber on my team. I feel like he always lets me down. Yet his points are still high. So I'm wondering if it's a consistency issue. He strikes out a lot.
He strikes out a lot, but he also walked 86 times. So he's got that. And unbelievably enough, for a big man, he had 10 stolen bases. All right.
Which will bump up to 12 to 15 this year.
All right. And so when you look at it, and he only had a 240 batting average of balls in play, that's way below. He's got a 268 career, so that's below what you would expect out of him. So if that normalizes, which it probably will, because now we're talking about another left-hand hitter.
Yeah. That lineup in Philly, though, is so tough.
It is. And so I'm sure with 3 Phillies guys in our league, that's not going to happen. So
yeah, Schwarber will be gone for sure. Now, you've got Michael Harris, and I understand it. You got him at 8. I don't have him in my top 10, but he's right there on that cusp. I worry a little bit about Michael Harris. He had a great rookie season overall.
Yeah,
I'm concerned.
The rookie of the year, even though I thought Spencer Strider should have been the rookie of the year, but that's just
another Brave.
Yes, another Brave.
Yeah,
another player that I had on my fantasy team who he got hurt late, so maybe that's probably what happened to him. So.
Do you have concern about the sophomore slump for Michael Harris?
Well, the thing that because I got his numbers right here, the thing that gets me is he only had 21 walks and 107 strikeouts, and so that is a concern. But he is, a young guy and another left-hand hitter. Mm-hmm. So he's got that in his favor. And so, and he's ranked number 9 by Fantasy Pros and 28th overall. So in the 3rd round, I might be pretty safe taking him in the 3rd if he's there.
I put a guy in my top 10 that I'm going to guess nobody else has in their top 10. So I'm taking a little bit of a swing at this. But if he stays healthy, I've got Luis Robert from Chicago White Sox in there at number 9.
You're the second person that I've heard that have raved about him. But I have been burned so – we're talking burnt like black coat.
Yeah.
So there's zero chance that Luis Robert will be on my fantasy team.
Okay, so, that's good. That's good. So you're going to get Kyle Tucker.
You're up. I'm going to get Robert. Chicago White Sox. You talked about that, and so I could see he's got all the tools. So if he ever put it together, he can be a guy who can really, really do it for you in fantasy. But I'm not going to be the guy that swings for the fences for him and tries to get him on my team.
Yeah, see, that's where I sit at is if as a fantasy player, you've got to hit on these guys at the right time. And if you miss, obviously it hurts. Yeah, and he's a guy, and I think the White Sox as a whole, not saying every White Sox player, but I think the White Sox are sliding under the radar this year. And I think because of the disappointment of last season when we all expected them to be good.
A 92-year-old manager at the helm anymore, so that's got to help.
But last year we expected them to be good, and they weren't.
Because they won the division the year before.
Yeah. And I think they're going to be right there again. The Guardians are going to be good again for sure. But the White Sox halftime, they have some really good pitching. They've got some stars if they can stay healthy. Healthy is everything.
That's been the concern, behind the plate, in the outfield.
Yeah.
Those guys, you don't know if they're going to play 140 games or they might play 78.
Yeah. But I'm in on them. I think this is the year. This is the year for them. Let's talk about Bryce Harper. Neither of us have him in our top 10. He's obviously coming into the season injured, coming off Tommy John surgery. When he returns, he's going to be effective. Do you draft Bryce Harper and stash him? Or do you say, I'm going to let somebody else do that?
Well, I see Bryce Harper as more of a DH this year than an outfielder because of the injury. And from what I've read about him, that he's ahead of schedule.
Okay.
As far as his health is concerned. And they expect him to be in camp.
Oh.
Doesn't mean that he's ready, going to be playing in camp, but he's supposed to be in camp. And so he's kind of like the same situation that certain motorcycle, shortstop for the Padres, Tatis, last year, where, you didn't know for sure when he would be back. It was speculated he'd be back by the All-Star game. That's what the initial progress report said. And if he's ahead of that, then it depends on what's happening during the draft. I'm not going to take a swing at him in the middle of a draft. I'm not going to do that. But if he's sliding and it's getting into the very late stages of the draft, I could certainly see taking him and putting him on your IL spot whenever that opens up, and then probably taking a player that you might have taken anyway and get him on your team. And then just hopefully you don't have a bunch of guys on your IL where you have to make decisions, which is almost impossible because, Tatis was in that situation. And I know, other players get hurt and all of a sudden, well, I got to drop somebody.
Yeah.
So
what, first of all, Dan D'Amico will draft him at some point. I'm guessing last year, Dan's like, oh, you don't want to draft Fernando Tatis. And then he drafted him.
Then he drafted him anyways, but then he had to wind up dropping him because of course he didn't play a game.
Right.
But what not like Tatis, because Bryce Harper is the anti-Tatis.
True.
To me. And so when he's ready to play, he's going to play. You don't have to worry about him and being a knucklehead or any other things. He's not going to be on motorcycles. He's not going to do handstands, or whatever else. And so he's a professional. And he was, for a while there, he was always like, oh, he's such a great player. But when you compared him to Trout blew him out of the water practically every year. But that has not been the case the last couple of years. Bryce Harper, ever since he went to Philadelphia, has been a solid player.
Yeah.
And so if he slides in the draft, I might have to make that decision. And he's Bryce Harper, so that makes things a little bit easier. But if somebody, I think someone's going to take him earlier than I'd be comfortable doing.
Yeah, I'll be that guy.
Okay.
I don't know that I can let him pass round 4 or 5.
If you're
Because
taking him that high, then yeah, you there's no chance I'm in on it.
He's the kind of guy that when he's back, as long as he's going to be there for 3/4 of the season, he's going to give something. And so if that means I have to stash for the first quarter of the season, whenever it could be, I'm trying to find some information right now when he's going to be back.
That's what I read, that the Phillies said that he was going to come to spring training, and what that he was ahead of schedule, whatever that means. And that his initial progress was he was going to be back by the All-Star game. But if he's ahead of that, then we're talking, I don't know, maybe June, maybe, because Acuna, we didn't know for sure when he was going to come in, and he was in by the end of April. So that's the kind of thing where you need to keep your, up on the progress reports on him and see what the situation is. We only got 2 weeks before the draft, so I don't know how much information you're going to get on him. So you're just going to have to fly by the seat of your pants.
And that's what it seems like most people are saying, All-Star break. But if he's going to just DH, there's definitely a chance he comes back before that. Not much before that, but a little before that as well.
I think because they'll still have his outfield eligibility, so that's fine.
Right.
So you can put him on the outfield, and we have a DH slot in our league, which every league should have.
Yeah.
I don't understand why you would have a league that doesn't have that. If you're doing drafts on ESPN, they don't have a DH slot on their league. I don't get that. But anyhow.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Well, I'm going to hold off.
Game.
Yeah. I like him. I think I'm looking 4th, 5th, 6th round, somewhere in that range.
I like about Bryce Harper, really.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, we've got
that much.
We've got 3 Phillies fans.
No.
3 Phillies fans in our league.
So maybe they'll arm wrestle each other and find out.
He could go first round for all we know. I mean,
that's right. So just like it was in the chat. We're talking about how Yelich is going in the first round between you and
me and Chase.
So you and Chase, and so if that happens, then I'm highly supportive of that.
I like Christian Yelich. I'm not taking him that high for sure. I think last year I got him in the 6th round, maybe.
He
and
consistently shows up as a player that's going to be a bust this year. I'm not sure I'm ready to get into that as far as because his ADP is below what it's been in the past. So
his ADP is ridiculous.
Yeah, so if you get him around that area, then there's value there.
See, typically I would go into this draft thinking, well, I can hold off. But now that Chase is in the league, I have to figure out how big of a homer is Chase. Am I going to have to jump up and get him?
Because Chase, this is his very first year of playing fantasy baseball.
Yeah.
So there is no, vapor trail. There's no smoke signals. There's nothing. There's no track record of what he's done in the past to be able to decipher what exactly he's going to do come draft day. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him.
Yep. Value pick, sleeper. Who do you get?
My value pick is a young player by the name of Stephen Kwan of the Cleveland Guardians. And it's not really it's a value pick, but still he's 28th outfielder overall, 114th. So it's not like he's going in the 20 round or anything. But if you at number 28 outfield, he's gonna go better than that to me.
I'm surprised he's that low. Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at things, he's another left-handed batter. All right. He's got and this is what really locked him into me. He walked 62 times and struck out 60.
Oh, wow.
That is the kind of thing that Albert Pujols used to do. Right?
Yeah.
So he won't, all these other guys, when you're in points leagues like we are, you have to be cognizant of their strikeouts, especially somebody like Schwarber who strikes out 214 times or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But he only struck out 60 times in 147 games. And he hit 298 and had 19 stolen bases and was caught 5 times. And he's 25 years old. So he's a guy that I would be looking for coming around. If this holds at 114, that's 10th round material right there. And there's all kinds of value to be found if that's what happens. I suspect that he'll go earlier than that in our draft. But if that holds, if you get him in the 10th round, there's all kinds of value to be found here.
Definitely. My value pick / sleeper is another young guy that maybe doesn't get viewed as being a young guy, and that's Eloy Jimenez. So I'm going to stick with the White Sox here.
Okay.
Again, injury prone. He's had injury issues. But I'm kind of banking on these guys this year to see what they can pull out. He's not going to get you any stolen bases, so the value is going to have to come with other things for sure with that. At the end of the day, his WAR last year was the highest it's been in his career, and which shows some improvement in my opinion. And so I look at Eloy Jimenez and think most people have him devalued. They're afraid of him because he gets injured. They're a guy that they'll pick up later because, well, I know that name, so maybe I'll take him. No one is passionate about Eloy Jimenez, and I think you can get a great value on him. And I think, and this is purely guessing, of course, I think this is the year he stays healthy. I think he plays around 140 to 150 games. And if he does that, he's going to be the kind of value pick that you can live with.
If he plays 140 or 150 and then Luis Robert plays 140 or 150 games, their outfield is popping up there in Chicago. So
yeah.
And then you got Andrew Vaughn, who keeps showing up on my value list.
Yeah.
And so we'll have to see what happens with Chicago, because they've got players that could really, really, really be a value.
Yeah.
And Vaughn, you don't have to worry about injuries with him. So
right. Who's your bust this year on outfielders?
My bust is Toscar Hernandez, who got sent to the Seattle Mariners by the Toronto Blue Jays. And Fantasy Pros has him as the number 16th outfielder, number 58 overall. That is way too high, and there's no chance that I would use a 5th or 6th round pick on this guy. Going to Seattle, that's not the hitter's park. That's not a hitter's paradise up there. And you look at unlike the guy I just talked about, Kwan, Toscar Hernandez walked just 34 times and struck out 152. That's a killer in points league.
Yeah.
And so when you look at and he also had a 335 batting average and balls in play. That's not sustainable. That's not gonna follow him around. And he's a right-hand hitter, so there will be no shift, aid for him. And so I'm not buying Oscar Hernandez. Don't be looking to do what he did in 2021, where he had 32 homers and 116 RBIs. That's not happening up in Seattle.
I don't think he can do worse than last year. I think even in a different field, I think he has to do better than he did last year.
Right. Not to the tune where you're taking him in the 5th round.
No. That's true.
That value is way overinflated. And so if somebody else wants to take him in the 5th or 6th, you go ahead and do that. And I'll just chug right on.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely too early for him. My bust, and this is not your stereotypical bust. I just think he's going to be valued too high, and I'm not willing to take him at that price because I think that's going to come back to bite you. It's Jordan Alvarez, and I know he's Houston now, and it's not because he's at Houston. To me, he's the kind of guy that I think we're going to see a dip in him, and he's still going to be
he hasn't picked up a bat in spring training.
True.
Not one. He hasn't had no at bats. Don't know when he will pick up an at bat. And for somebody that's going off the board in the 2nd round, that's not happening here.
Yeah, to me, he's just a guy that you have to understand where he's at in his career, where he's at health-wise, where he's at ballpark-wise isn't bad. But I just sit here and I look at Alvarez and I think people are going to want to take him early, and I just can't do it. I can't bring myself to do it.
Well, he'll be off the board by late 2nd round.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I've got him because Jordan Alvarez is the 8th overall player according to Fantasy Pros, and that ain't happening.
Yeah, I mean, he's young.
That could happen if he's healthy, but we don't know that.
Right.
And when it comes to the Astros, they are not the most outspoken organization, to put it nicely. When it comes to updating on their players and their health and their injuries.
Right.
And so you may not see him in a spring training game this year. So,
it's rare that I'm low on guys that are young. I always kind of think, hey, if you're young, you got the potential to come through, break through, have your best year yet.
He hits from the left side, so you think that would be as a DH, he's got value.
Sure.
Because,
all right. So let's get on to that topic real quick, as I don't want to take much more time. We're already past the hour mark, but you talked about every fantasy league should have DH, and I used to agree with you. Honestly, I look at it now. I think it's a watered down position. It's basically a utility position. Everybody has DH eligibility. Right,
and that's fine. But just being, because it's an official position now in every major league team, and as you mentioned, every player is going to be a DH at some point. Yeah. So, but when it comes to just pure DHs, standing at the top of the list has to be Shohei Ohtani. To me,
he's the only guy that you can draft.
Only guy that will only be DH.
Yes,
that's all he'll do besides pitch, of course.
But he's the only guy you can draft that only has the offensive ranking as DH. If there's anybody else out there that only says DH next to their name, you can't draft them, in my opinion.
No, you can't, because that's going to lock up your roster. And we talked about Cruz a while back, that he was going to start off by hitting number 5 in the San Diego Padres lineup. Well, good luck with that, because he will not be there for long. Yeah, and he's 47 years old or whatever he is. So, there's zero chance. Nelson Cruz, there's no spot on Team Wilson for him.
Yeah. Listen, Kevin's on Twitter at Kevin62 WILSEA, and you always find his articles on BellyUpFantasySports.com. What are you working on right now, Kev?
Well, because last week we talked about second base and shortstop, so I put out an article about shortstop value plays, and shortstop is a deep position this year. Yeah. And so you might want to take a look at that. And now that we've talked about outfielders, there's going to be a story dropping tomorrow about my outfield value plays other than Stephen Kwan, because I do have some. that I really like that some young guys, some veterans returning from injury. So that story will be dropping. You could be real sure that'll happen tomorrow. So look for
Very
that
nice.
on the Belly Up Fantasy website. And there's a lot of content on that Belly Up Fantasy website for
There is.
baseball. It's blowing the doors off of every other sport on that site. So get over there, check out everything that's on there. You'll like what you find.
Next week, we cover the pitchers. We round out our position previews and rankings to get us ready for the draft in 2 weeks, which will air live for you right here on YouTube and Belly Up Fantasy Facebook as well. We'll bring on the other guys from our league throughout the draft and have them share their thoughts and opinions as they're going through it as well. But next week, we rank starting pitchers. We'll talk about relief pitchers and closers specifically as well next week. Again, we'll get you all ready for draft. You can follow me at Sports Stove, Twitter and Instagram as well. And then don't forget about Bob Lung. Came on at the beginning of the program.
That's right.
Great stuff there. BigGuyFantasySports.com. And then they got that baseball consistency guide on Amazon for $7.99 there as well. Lots of tools available to you. And I really appreciate Bob taking some time to come on as well. All right, Kev, we're at an hour 5, and I know everybody loves listening to us, but we're going to give them a break for the evening. I'll get this up on the audio as soon as possible.
We will do the draft a little bit earlier than we normally do the show. Is that what the plan is?
Is it earlier? I thought it was at 8 o'clock, but it might be at 7. I'll have to look.
That's something we'll need to look at.
We'll let people know next week. We'll tell them next week when to be ready for that for sure.
That's right.
But I think it's still at 8 o'clock.
When the curtain raises on the fantasy draft, Belly Up Sports edition.
That's right. It'll be at 8 o'clock, a normal time, 8 o'clock
Normal
Eastern time.
Okay.
Yes,
That's
sir.
fine.
Yes, sir.
Totally good.
So we'll have it ready for you right then. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's edition of the Sports Stove Fantasy Baseball Show, presented by Belly Up Fantasy and Righteous Felon Jerky. Until next time, we'll see you around the Sports Stove.
That's right.